The gunshot that shattered the stable window missed her head by inches, and Beatrice Sullivan knew she could not sleep another night in the hayloft of the dusty trail livery. She pressed her back against the rough wooden wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribcage, and listened to the voices below arguing in slurred, drunken tones about whether they had seen someone moving up in the shadows. White Pine, Nevada had seemed like salvation when she had arrived 3 weeks ago with nothing but the clothes on her back and $7 sewn into her hem. But lately, the mining town felt more like a trap closing around her throat. It was September of 1876, and the silver boom had drawn every kind of person west, including the men who wanted to hurt her. She had been running since St. Louis, since the night her stepfather had tried to sell her to a brothel owner to pay his gambling debts. Beatrice was 20 years old, alone, and terrified in ways that made her bones ache. The stable owner, a kind old man named Chester, had looked the other way when she started sleeping in his loft a week after arriving in town. He never asked questions, just left her alone and sometimes brought her day-old biscuits wrapped in cloth. But Chester had died 4 days ago, his heart giving out while he was shoeing a horse, and his nephew had taken over the business. The nephew was not kind. The nephew had friends who drank too much and noticed things like a young woman with dark blonde hair and frightened blue eyes trying to disappear into shadows. She waited until the voices faded, and the street fell silent except for the distant piano music from the saloons. Then she gathered her few belongings: a spare dress, a shawl, a small Bible that had belonged to her mother, and those 7 precious dollars. She climbed down the ladder as quietly as she could, every creak of wood making her freeze, every shadow a potential threat. The horses stirred in their stalls but did not whinny. She slipped out the back door into the September night, cool air hitting her face like a blessing. Where could she go? The boarding house wanted $2 a week she could not spare. The hotel was full of miners and prospectors who looked at unaccompanied women like they were part of the entertainment. There was a church, but the preacher's wife had already made it clear that decent women did not arrive in town alone without explanation, and Beatrice's lack of family or references made her suspect. She walked quickly through the back alleys, keeping to darkness, her mind racing through impossible options. That was when she heard the second gunshot, this one closer, and a man's voice shouting her name. She ran. Her boots pounded against hard, packed earth as she fled toward the edge of town, toward the pine-covered mountains that rose like dark giants against the starlit sky. Behind her, multiple voices now, and the sound of boots giving chase. She did not look back. She just ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed. Ran until the buildings fell away, and she was stumbling through scrub, brush, and rocks, climbing upward into wilderness. A hand caught her arm and she screamed, twisting away, but then another hand clamped over her mouth and a deep voice rumbled close to her ear. "Stop fighting me. They are right behind you." The voice was rough, male, and completely unfamiliar. Terror shot through her veins like ice water. She thrashed harder, but the man was immensely strong. He lifted her bodily off her feet and carried her deeper into the trees, moving with surprising silence for someone so large. She could feel the solid wall of muscle in his chest, the iron bands of his arms, and she prepared herself to fight for her life when he stopped. He set her down behind an enormous boulder and pressed her against the stone with his body, one hand still over her mouth. "Be silent," he whispered, and there was something in his tone that made her obey. They waited. She could hear her pursuers crashing through the underbrush, cursing and calling out to each other. They sounded close, too close. The man holding her did not move. He barely seemed to breathe. She could feel his heart beating, slow and steady against her back, while hers felt like a wild animal trying to escape. Minutes passed. The voices grew more distant, moving off in the wrong direction. Finally, they faded entirely. The man waited even longer before he slowly removed his hand from her mouth and stepped back. Beatrice spun around to face him, pressing herself against the boulder, trying to see his features in the darkness. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that blocked out the stars. She could make out long hair past his shoulders and a thick beard, but his face was mostly shadow. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice shaking. "Thank you for helping me." "Who were those men?" His voice was as rough as tree bark, but not unkind. "I do not know their names. They are friends of the new stable owner. They have been bothering me." She was too exhausted and frightened to lie. "Where are you staying?" She hesitated. "I was staying in the stable loft." A long pause. "Not anymore, I would guess." "No, not anymore." Another pause. She heard him shift his weight and equipment creaked leather and metal. "Do you have anywhere else to go?" The simple question broke something inside her. "No." Her voice came out small and defeated. "I have nowhere." He stood silent for a moment that stretched too long. Then he said, "My cabin is 2 miles up the mountain. You can stay there tonight. Tomorrow we will figure out something else." Every warning she had ever heard about strange men flashed through her mind. But the alternative was going back down to White Pine, and that was clearly impossible now. Those men would be watching. The new stable owner would throw her out regardless. She had no money for a room, no friends, no family. This stranger had saved her from immediate danger. Maybe he would continue to be her salvation, or maybe he would be something far worse. But standing alone on a dark mountainside with nowhere to go made the choice for her. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." He turned and started walking uphill without another word. She followed, stumbling over roots and rocks she could not see. He moved like he knew every inch of the terrain, his steps sure even in darkness. After a few minutes he slowed down, seeming to realize she could not keep pace. "Here," he said gruffly and held out his hand. She took it, his palm rough and warm, his fingers completely engulfing hers. He pulled her along more carefully after that, steering her around obstacles. They climbed steadily upward. The scent of pine was thick in the air, mixed with wood smoke and something wild she could not name. Her legs ached. Her lungs burned from the altitude and exertion, but she did not complain. This man was helping her. She would not give him reason to change his mind. Eventually, she saw a dim light ahead. A cabin materialized from the darkness, sturdy and well-built with a stone chimney releasing a thin stream of smoke. There was a lean-to stable beside it where she could just make out the shapes of a horse and a mule. Everything looked tidy and well-maintained. He led her to the door and opened it, gesturing for her to enter. The interior was a single large room, lit by the dying embers of a fire in the stone fireplace. There was a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies and equipment, a workbench covered with traps and tools. In one corner was a bed frame with a thick mattress that looked impossibly soft and luxurious for a mountain cabin. Furs and quilts were piled on it. The whole space was clean and organized, nothing like what she had expected from a man living alone in the wilderness. He closed the door behind them and moved to the fireplace, adding wood to coax the flames back to life. Light grew gradually, and she finally got a clear look at him. He was perhaps 28 or 29, with sun-bronzed skin and deep-set dark eyes that held an intensity that made her breath catch. His hair was indeed long, dark brown with hints of auburn, pulled back from his face with a leather cord. His beard was thick, but well trimmed. His shoulders were massive, his arms corded with muscle visible even through his shirt. He looked like he could break a man in half without much effort, and probably had. Everything about him screamed danger and raw masculinity. But his movements around the cabin were careful and controlled, and when he finally looked at her fully, his eyes were more curious than threatening. "Sit," he said, nodding toward one of the chairs. She sat gratefully, her legs nearly giving out. He moved to a shelf and retrieved a tin cup, filled it with water from a bucket, and handed it to her. She drank deeply, not realizing how thirsty she had been. He watched her, leaning against the table with his arms crossed over his broad chest. "My name is Xavier Holmes," he said. "Most people call me Holmes. I trap and hunt in these mountains. I come into White Pine once a month for supplies. I mind my own business, and I expect the same from others." "I am Beatrice Sullivan," she replied, setting down the cup. "I arrived in White Pine 3 weeks ago from St. Louis. I am alone. I was trying to find work, but it has been difficult." "Why were those men chasing you?" She looked down at her hands, shame heating her cheeks. "The stable owner's nephew wants me to work in one of the saloons. As a percentage girl, I refused. He got angry. He and his friends have been harassing me, trying to force me to agree. Tonight they came to the loft and one of them fired a gun. I ran." Holmes was quiet for a long moment. When she dared to glance up at him, his jaw was tight and his eyes hard. "Men like that deserve to be horsewhipped," he said flatly. "You were right to run." Relief flooded through her. She had been half afraid he would judge her, assume she had brought this on herself somehow. Instead, he seemed angry on her behalf. "I do not know what to do now," she admitted. "I cannot go back to town, but I have nowhere else to go." He straightened up and moved toward the corner with the bed. For a moment, her heart jumped into her throat, but he simply started stripping off the quilts and furs, piling them in his arms. "You will sleep here tonight," he said, nodding toward the bed. "That is the softest bed I own. You will be safe here." She stared at the bed, then at him. "Where will you sleep?" "I will make a bedroll by the fire. I have done it plenty of times." He was already pulling more furs and a blanket from a chest, arranging them on the floor near the hearth. "I cannot take your bed," she protested, standing up. "This is your home. I am the intruder. I should sleep on the floor." He turned to look at her, and there was something almost gentle in his fierce eyes. "When was the last time you slept in an actual bed?" She thought back. Months. It had been months since before she fled St. Louis. She had been sleeping in corners, in haylofts, in the back of a wagon once when someone had taken pity on her. Her silence was answer enough. "Then you will sleep in the bed," he said firmly. "I will not argue about it. You are exhausted and frightened and you need rest. Take the bed." Tears pricked at her eyes. Such a simple act of kindness, but it felt monumental after weeks of cruelty and indifference. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." He nodded once, then turned his attention back to his makeshift bed. "There is a basin and cloth if you want to wash. The outhouse is 20 paces behind the cabin. I will step outside while you prepare for sleep." He was giving her privacy, she realized, treating her with respect. She wanted to weep from the sheer relief of being treated like a person instead of prey. He pulled on a heavy coat and went out into the night, closing the door quietly behind him. She stood alone in the cabin, surrounded by warmth and safety, and let herself cry for just a moment. Then she wiped her eyes, used the basin to wash her face and hands, and approached the bed like it was something holy. The mattress was stuffed with something soft, maybe wool or goose down. The sheets were clean. The quilts were thick and warm. She unlaced her boots and removed them, then climbed onto the bed fully clothed. She sank into softness like nothing she had felt in so long. Her whole body seemed to sigh with relief. She pulled the quilts up to her chin and closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she felt almost safe. Holmes came back inside a few minutes later. She heard him moving around quietly, banking the fire, checking the door. Then he settled onto his bedroll with barely a sound. "Sleep well, Miss Sullivan," he said into the darkness. "Sleep well, Mr. Holmes," she replied. And then, because she needed him to know, "Thank you for your kindness. I will not forget it." "We will talk more in the morning," he said simply. She wanted to stay awake, to be vigilant, to guard against whatever might happen next. But exhaustion pulled her down like a stone, and within minutes she was deeply, dreamlessly asleep in the softest bed she had touched in months. Morning came slowly, light filtering through the single window in shades of gold and amber. Beatrice woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and for a confused moment she thought she was somewhere else, someone else, back when her mother was alive and mornings were gentle things. Then memory returned and she sat up quickly, heart racing. Holmes was at the fireplace, cooking breakfast on an iron skillet. He glanced over his shoulder at her. "Good morning. There is water in the basin if you want to wash. Breakfast will be ready in a few minutes." She climbed out of bed, finger combing her hair and trying to make herself presentable. In daylight, the cabin looked even more impressive. Everything had its place. The floor was swept clean. The shelves were organized with military precision. This was not just a shelter, this was a home, carefully maintained and cared for. Holmes himself looked even more imposing in daylight, his size and strength undeniable. But his movements as he cooked were practiced and efficient, almost domestic. They ate breakfast at the small table, bacon and beans and coffee so strong it made her eyes water. She had not eaten a real meal in 2 days, and she had to force herself not to bolt the food like an animal. Holmes ate in silence, watching her with those intense dark eyes. When they finished, he poured more coffee and leaned back in his chair. "Tell me your situation, Miss Sullivan, all of it. I need to understand what I am dealing with." So she told him. She told him about her mother dying when she was 17, about her father remarrying a year later to a woman with a grown son. She told him about her father dying in an accident at the factory where he worked, about her stepmother immediately remarrying, about her new stepfather being a drunk and a gambler. She told him about the debts piling up, about the night the brothel owner came to the house, and her stepfather tried to hand her over like she was property. She told him about running, about using the money she had earned doing seamstress work to buy a train ticket west, about thinking she could start over in a new place. She told him about arriving in White Pine with almost nothing, about the difficulty of finding honest work in a mining town full of men and suspicious women. She told him about Chester being kind, about his nephew being cruel, about the escalating harassment that had culminated in last night's violence. By the time she finished, her throat was tight with emotion and her eyes burned. Holmes sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. "You have no family who would take you in?" he asked finally. "No one. My mother had a sister back east, but she made it clear years ago she wanted nothing to do with us. My father was an only child. I am alone. And you have what, $7 to your name?" She nodded, surprised he had remembered that detail from last night's brief conversation. He was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup. Then he looked up at her, his gaze direct and serious. "Here is what I think. You cannot go back to White Pine, at least not alone and not anytime soon. Those men will be looking for you. Even if the sheriff were inclined to help, which he probably is not, it would be your word against theirs. You have no money for travel to another town, and even if you did, you would face the same problems there that you faced here. You need time to figure out a real plan, and you need a safe place to do that figuring." Everything he said was true, and hearing it laid out so plainly made her feel hollowed out with despair. "I know," she whispered. I know all that, but I do not know what to do. Stay here, he said simply. She blinked. What? Stay here at the cabin with me? He held up a hand as she started to speak. I am not suggesting anything improper. I mean you would stay here as my employee, I suppose, or my partner. I could use help around here cooking, mending, preserving food, things like that. Winter is coming and there is a lot to prepare. I would provide room and board protection and pay you a small wage so you can save money. When spring comes, if you want to move on, you will have resources to do it safely. If you want to stay longer, we can renegotiate. She stared at him, trying to process the offer. You would do that? For a stranger, his mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile beneath his beard. I live alone on a mountain, Miss Sullivan. I am not exactly overburdened with social obligations, and frankly, I could use the help. I am a decent hunter and trapper, but my cooking is terrible, and I have been wearing shirts with holes in them for 2 years because I cannot sew worth a damn. If you are willing to work, I am willing to house you. It is a practical arrangement that benefits us both. Practical. He was framing it as practical, and maybe it was. But it also felt like salvation, like the answer to prayers she had been too tired and frightened to properly voice. Still, she had to be sure. Mr. Holmes, I need to know your expectations. What exactly would you want from me? His expression darkened. I would want you to help maintain the household, cooking, cleaning, mending, food preservation, that sort of thing. I would expect you to work hard because life up here is not easy. I would want honesty and respect. That is all. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping lower. I am not going to touch you, Miss Sullivan. I am not going to force myself on you or expect any kind of intimate arrangement. You would have your own space, your own privacy. I am offering you work and safety, nothing more and nothing less. I give you my word on that, and my word is good. She searched his face, looking for deception or hidden intent, but his eyes were steady and clear. Everything about him suggested a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. And really, what choice did she have? Go back to White Pine and hope for mercy from men who had none. Wander into the wilderness alone and hope to survive. Take her chances on the road to another town with winter coming, all right, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. I accept your offer. I will work hard, I promise. I am good at cooking and sewing and keeping house. I will earn my keep. Something that might have been relief crossed his face. Good. Then it is settled. We will go into town together in a few weeks when I make my supply run. By then, those men will have moved on to other trouble. We will make it clear to everyone that you are working for me and under my protection. No one will bother you after that. Why not? She asked, genuinely curious. His smile was grim. Because I have a reputation in White Pine. People know I do not start fights, but I finish them. They know I can disappear into these mountains and never be found. They know I mind my own business, and I expect the same. If I say you are under my protection, that will mean something. There was a hardness in his voice that told her he had earned that reputation through actions, not words. A shiver ran through her, but oddly it was not fear. It was something else, something that felt almost like security. They spent the rest of the morning establishing routines. Holmes showed her around the cabin, explaining where everything was kept. He showed her the root cellar dug into the hillside where he stored vegetables and preserved foods. He showed her the smokehouse where he cured meat, the lean-to stable where his horse Ranger and mule Bess lived, the creek 100 yards downhill where they got water. He explained his schedule. He checked his trap lines every 3 days, hunted as needed, worked on maintaining his equipment and structures. He explained what he needed from her 2 meals a day, keeping the cabin clean, mending clothes and equipment, helping with food preservation, tending the small vegetable garden before the frost killed it. Beatrice absorbed everything, asking questions when she needed clarification. It felt good to have purpose again, to have tasks and responsibilities instead of just fear and uncertainty. Holmes was patient with her questions, thorough in his explanations. He was not warm exactly, but he was not cold either. He was simply straightforward, treating her like a competent person capable of doing what needed to be done. That first day set the pattern for the days that followed. Beatrice woke early and started the fire, made coffee and breakfast. Holmes would eat quickly and head out to check traps or hunt, sometimes returning by mid-afternoon, sometimes not until evening. She spent her days cleaning the cabin top to bottom, mending every piece of clothing and equipment that needed attention, learning where everything was and how Holmes liked things organized. She cooked meals that were simple but hearty stews and roasted meat and beans and cornbread. She worked hard, exhausting herself so she would sleep well in the soft bed Holmes continued to insist she use. The first few nights, she lay awake listening to him breathe on his bedroll by the fire, hyper-aware of his presence, ready to bolt if he changed his mind about his promises. But he never did. He never approached the bed except to strip it or remake it when she insisted on washing the linens. He never looked at her with anything other than casual assessment. He treated her exactly as he had promised as an employee, a partner in the business of survival. Slowly, carefully, she began to relax. By the end of the first week, they had fallen into an easy rhythm. Holmes was not much for conversation, but he was not uncomfortable to be silent around. Sometimes at dinner, he would tell her about his day, a fox caught in a trap, fresh elk tracks he was following, plans for reinforcing the stable roof before winter. She would tell him about her work, the shirts she had mended, the vegetables she had harvested and stored, the soup she was planning for the next day. It was domestic and ordinary and utterly peaceful in a way she had not experienced in years. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, not threatening but intense, like he was trying to figure something out. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Did he see a woman or just a worker? Did he see someone interesting, or just another stray creature he had taken in like Ranger and Bess, she wondered, and she did not ask. The second week, Holmes taught her how to shoot. He took her out into a clearing with his rifle and set up targets. "You need to know how to protect yourself," he said bluntly. "I am gone for hours at a time. If someone comes up here looking for trouble while I am away, you need to be able to handle it." She had never held a gun before. The rifle was heavy and awkward in her hands. But Holmes was a patient teacher, adjusting her stance, showing her how to aim and breathe and squeeze the trigger. She missed the target completely the first dozen times. He just handed her more ammunition and told her to try again. By the end of the session, she managed to hit the target twice. "Good enough for now," he said, taking the rifle back. "We will practice more. You do not need to be a sharpshooter. You just need to be able to make noise and look dangerous." "Do you really think those men might come looking for me?" she asked as they walked back to the cabin. "Probably not." But probably is not the same as certainly. Better to be prepared. It made sense, in a grim sort of way. And she appreciated that he was investing time in her safety, teaching her to protect herself rather than assuming he could always be there to do it. That night, as they ate dinner, she finally worked up the courage to ask him something she had been wondering about. "Mr. Holmes, why do you live up here alone? You clearly had a life before this. What brought you to the mountains?" He was quiet for a long time, and she thought maybe she had overstepped. But then he said slowly, "I was a soldier. I fought in the war." He did not need to specify which war. Everyone knew he meant the Civil War, which had ended just 11 years earlier. "I fought for the Union." I saw things, did things that I cannot forget. When it was over, I tried to go back to regular life. I tried working in a city, being around people, but I could not do it. Too much noise, too many people, too many memories, so I came west. I found these mountains. I found peace in the silence and the solitude. I have been here for 6 years now, and I have never regretted it. There was pain in his voice, old and deep. Beatrice understood that kind of pain, the kind that made you want to flee from everything familiar. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked softly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but lonely is better than surrounded by people and feeling like you cannot breathe." She nodded. She understood that too, in a different way. They finished dinner in companionable silence, and later, as she lay in bed, she thought about how strange it was that two people running from different pasts had ended up sharing a cabin on a mountain. Strange, but also somehow right. The third week brought colder weather. The aspen trees turned gold and shed their leaves in showers that carpeted the ground. The mornings were frosty. Holmes brought in more firewood, stacking it carefully under the eaves to keep it dry. They worked together to harvest the last of the vegetables from the garden and store them in the root cellar. They smoked the meat from a deer Holmes brought down. They reinforced the stable and made sure Ranger and Bess had everything they needed. Beatrice found herself watching Holmes more than she probably should. She noticed things: the way his muscles moved under his shirt when he split wood, the careful gentleness with which he handled the animals, the quiet intensity of his focus when he worked on repairing a trap. He was undeniably handsome beneath the beard and the rough edges, and more than handsome, he was capable and steady and safe. She felt herself drawn to him in ways that made her nervous. This was a business arrangement. He was her employer, her protector. She should not be having thoughts about the breadth of his shoulders or the rare moments when he almost smiled. But she was. She definitely was. One evening near the end of the third week, Holmes came back from checking traps with blood on his hands and a grin set to his jaw. Beatrice looked up from the stew she was stirring and felt alarm spike through her. "Are you hurt?" she asked quickly. "No, but I found something I did not like." He moved to the basin and washed his hands roughly. "Someone has been in my territory. They destroyed 2 of my traps and left them where I would find them. It is a message." "What kind of message?" "The kind that says someone knows you are here and wants to make trouble." He dried his hands and turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I think it might be those men from town. I think they tracked you here somehow." Fear, which had finally started to recede, came roaring back. "What do we do?" "We prepare." He moved to the wall and took down his rifle, checking it with practiced efficiency. "I am going to set up some perimeter alarms, simple things that will make noise if someone approaches. And we are going to move up our timeline for going into town. We will go tomorrow. I am going to make it very clear that you are under my protection and that anyone who touches you will answer to me. That should end this. And if it does not," his eyes met hers, hard and unyielding, "then I will end it another way." There was no question what he meant: violence if necessary. She should have been appalled, but instead she felt a fierce gratitude that someone was finally willing to stand between her and harm. They spent the evening preparing for the trip to town. Holmes gave her money to buy fabric and thread and any personal items she needed. He explained that they would leave at dawn and be back by evening. He made her promise to stay close to him the entire time they were in White Pine, not to wander off or be alone. That night, Beatrice lay in bed listening to Holmes move around the cabin, setting up his alarms and checking his weapons. She felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had brought danger to his doorstep. He was risking himself to protect her. The debt she owed him was growing beyond anything she could ever repay. She must have slept eventually, because she woke to Holmes gently shaking her shoulder. "Time to go," he said quietly. Dawn was just breaking, the sky turning pale gray beyond the window. She dressed quickly and ate the breakfast he had already prepared. Then they went out to the stable together and he saddled Ranger, his big bay gelding, and the mule for carrying supplies. "You will ride with me," he said, gesturing to the horse. "It is faster than having you on the mule." He mounted first, then reached down and hauled her up like she weighed nothing, settling her in front of him. She ended up pressed against his chest, surrounded by his arms as he held the reins. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, steady and strong. The ride down the mountain took over an hour, and every minute of it, she was acutely aware of his presence, his warmth, his strength, the protective cage of his body around hers. White Pine came into view as the sun climbed higher, the town looking smaller and shabbier in daylight than it had in her memory. Holmes rode straight down the main street, not trying to hide or avoid attention. People turned to look. She saw recognition on some faces, surprise on others. Holmes stopped in front of the general store and dismounted, then lifted her down with the same easy strength. "Stay close," he reminded her, his voice low. Then he walked into the store with her right behind him. The proprietor, a man named Miller, looked up with a professional smile that faltered slightly when he saw Holmes's expression. "Morning, Holmes. What can I do for you? I need supplies. Miss Sullivan will give you her list. She is working for me now, managing my household. I want everyone in town to know that she is under my protection. Anyone who bothers her answers to me. Understood?" Miller's eyes widened slightly. "Understood. No problem at all. Miss Sullivan, what do you need?" Beatrice handed over the list she had written, her voice steady despite her nerves. Miller gathered the items quickly, making small talk about the weather and the upcoming winter. As he worked, other people came into the store and Holmes repeated his message each time. "Miss Sullivan works for me. She is under my protection. Spread the word." Word spread fast in a small town. By the time they left the general store, people were watching from doorways and windows. Holmes made a point of stopping at the saloon, the boarding house, even the sheriff's office. Everywhere, the message was the same. Everywhere, people nodded and agreed. No one wanted trouble with Xavier Holmes. They were loading supplies onto the mule when the stable owner's nephew appeared, flanked by two of his friends. Beatrice recognized them from that terrifying night, and she stepped back instinctively. Holmes moved in front of her, his body a wall of muscle and menace. "I hear you are harboring stolen property, Holmes," the nephew said, his voice carrying an edge of bravado. "I hear you are a coward who chases women with guns in the dark," Holmes replied evenly. "Miss Sullivan is not your property. She never was. She works for me now. If you have a problem with that, state it clearly so we can settle this." The nephew's face flushed red. His hand moved toward the gun at his hip. Holmes did not reach for his own weapon. He just stood there, utterly still, utterly calm, radiating a danger so palpable it made the air feel heavy. "Go ahead," Holmes said quietly. "Pull that gun, see what happens." The sheriff emerged from his office across the street, drawn by the commotion. "We having a problem here." "No problem," Holmes said, not taking his eyes off the nephew. "Just making sure everyone understands the situation. Miss Sullivan is my employee and under my protection. These men were harassing her. I am here to inform them that if they do so again, there will be consequences." The sheriff looked between the men, clearly assessing the situation. He knew Holmes's reputation. He knew the nephew was trouble. "Seems clear enough to me," the sheriff said finally. "Holmes has stated his position. I suggest everyone accept it and move on." The nephew looked like he wanted to argue, but his friends were already backing away. Neither of them wanted to face down Xavier Holmes over a woman who was not worth dying for. After a tense moment, the nephew spat on the ground and turned away, muttering curses. Holmes watched until they were out of sight. Then he turned to Beatrice. "Are you all right?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He had just faced down 3 armed men without flinching, had protected her with nothing but his reputation and his willingness to back it up with violence. She felt shaken and grateful and something else, something warm and fierce that she did not want to examine too closely. They finished loading the mule and mounted Ranger. The ride back up the mountain was quiet. Holmes seemed tense, alert, watching their surroundings carefully. Only when they were well away from town did he relax slightly. "That should be the end of it," he said. "They are cowards. They will not risk coming after you now." "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for protecting me." "That is what I promised," he said simply, as if it had cost him nothing. But she knew better. She knew he had risked violence, possibly death, to keep her safe. The debt she owed him was beyond calculation now. They reached the cabin in late afternoon. Holmes checked his perimeter alarms and found them undisturbed. The tension in his shoulders eased. They unloaded the supplies together, working in the efficient silence they had developed. Later, over dinner, he seemed more relaxed than she had seen him since finding the destroyed traps. "I think we are past the worst of it," he said. "Winter will be here soon. We have work to do to prepare, but we should be safe here." "I will work hard," she promised. "I will make sure we are ready." He looked at her across the table, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You have already proven yourself, Miss Sullivan. I could not ask for a better partner in this." Partner. The word resonated through her. Not employee, not burden, partner. It felt significant, though she was not sure exactly how. The weeks that followed were busy ones. Winter was approaching fast, and there was endless work to be done. They spent long days splitting and stacking firewood, repairing anything that needed attention before the snow came, preserving the last of the fresh food. Holmes taught her how to tan hides, how to make candles, how to do 100 small tasks necessary for surviving a mountain winter. She taught him that food could actually taste good if prepared with care, that clothes could be more than just functional, that a home could be comfortable as well as practical. They grew closer without really meaning to, the way people do when they share work and space and purpose. Holmes began to talk more, sharing stories from his past in small doses, his childhood on a farm in Ohio, his decision to enlist, the friends he had lost in the war. She shared her own memories, her mother's laughter, the songs they used to sing together, the dreams she had once had of a different life. They were both damaged people, carrying scars that would never fully heal. But somehow, in the isolation of the mountain cabin, those scars did not seem quite as terrible. Beatrice began to notice changes in how Holmes looked at her. The glances lingered longer. His hand would brush hers when they worked side by side, and he would not pull away as quickly. Once, when she was reaching for something on a high shelf, he came up behind her to help, and for a moment they were pressed together, his chest against her back, his arms around her. The moment stretched too long to be accidental, and when she turned her head to thank him, their faces were inches apart. His eyes dropped to her lips, her breath caught. Then he stepped back quickly, clearing his throat, and the moment passed, but something had shifted. She felt it, and she was certain he felt it too. The first snow came in mid-October, a light dusting that melted by afternoon. But it was a warning. Winter was coming, and soon they would be trapped on the mountain together until spring. The thought should have been daunting, but instead Beatrice found herself looking forward to it. The idea of months alone with Holmes, safe from the world, did not frighten her. It excited her in ways she barely understood. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Holmes finally spoke about what had been building between them. "Miss Sullivan, I need to talk to you about something." Her heart jumped into her throat. "All right." He stared into the fire, his profile sharp in the flickering light. "When I brought you here, I made you a promise. I said I would not touch you, would not expect anything from you beyond work. I meant that promise and I have kept it, but I need you to know that it has been difficult." She waited, barely breathing. "You are a beautiful woman," he continued slowly. "More than beautiful, you are kind and strong and intelligent. Living with you, working beside you, it has made me feel things I thought I had buried years ago. I find myself thinking about you when I should be focused on other things. I find myself wanting more than I have any right to want." He turned to look at her finally, his eyes intense. "But I will not break my promise. If you want me to remain your employer and nothing more, I will do that. Your safety and comfort come first, always." Beatrice's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She had been feeling the same pull, the same longing, but she had been afraid to acknowledge it. Now he had laid it bare, and she had to decide what she wanted. "Mr. Holmes," she said carefully, "when you found me on that mountain, I was running from men who wanted to use me, hurt me, treat me like property. You did the opposite. You gave me safety, respect, kindness. You treated me like a person who mattered. No one has done that for me in a very long time." She stood up and moved closer to where he sat, her legs trembling. "I have been thinking about you too. I have been wanting things I thought I should not want. But the truth is, I do want them. I want more than just being your employee. I want to know you, really know you. I want to be close to you. If you want the same thing, then I am saying yes. I am saying I want that too." He stared up at her, his expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. Slowly he stood, towering over her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough. "I do not want you to feel obligated. I do not want you to think you owe me anything." "I am certain," she whispered. "This is not about obligation. This is about wanting you." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his large, calloused hand. His touch was gentle despite his strength. "I have not been with anyone in a long time," he admitted. "I am out of practice with gentleness, but I swear I will try. I will never hurt you." "I trust you," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. He leaned down and kissed her, soft and tentative at first, like he was afraid she might break. But when she kissed him back, rising on her toes to reach him better, pressing closer, he deepened the kiss with a low sound in his throat. His arms came around her, pulling her against his body, and she felt the strength of him, the barely leashed power, and it did not frighten her. It made her feel safe and wanted and alive. They broke apart after a long moment, both breathing hard. Holmes rested his forehead against hers. "We should take this slowly," he said, though his voice was strained. "I do not want to rush you. What if I do not want slow?" She asked, surprising herself with her boldness. But it was true. She had been alone and afraid for so long. She wanted to feel something good, something real, something that was her choice. His eyes darkened. "Beatrice," he said, using her first name for the first time, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent shivers through her. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," she said. "I want this. I want you." He kissed her again, harder this time, with less restraint. His hands moved over her back, careful but possessive. She melted into him, into his warmth and strength, letting herself feel safe enough to want, safe enough to need. When he lifted her in his arms like she weighed nothing, and carried her to the bed, the soft bed he had given her that first night, she did not protest. When he laid her down gently and covered her body with his weight pressing her into the mattress, she welcomed it. They made love slowly, carefully, with more tenderness than she had known was possible. Holmes was true to his word. He was gentle, attentive, constantly checking to make sure she was all right. And she was more than all right. She was transformed, reborn, claimed and claiming in equal measure. Afterward they lay tangled together in the bed, her head on his broad chest, his arms wrapped around her, and she felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, wiping away a tear with his thumb. "I am perfect," she whispered. "For the first time in my life, I am exactly where I am supposed to be." He held her tighter. "I will take care of you," he promised, "for as long as you will let me." "Forever then," she said, and felt him smile against her hair. They slept together that night and every night after, the makeshift bedroll by the fire abandoned. The cabin felt different now, warmer somehow, filled with a new kind of energy. They still worked hard during the days. Winter was not going to prepare for itself, but the nights were theirs. They talked for hours, sharing pieces of themselves they had never shown anyone else. They made love when the mood struck them, sometimes slow and sweet, sometimes fierce and urgent. They learned each other's bodies, each other's hearts. The heavy snows came in November, and they were indeed trapped on the mountain, cut off from the world below. But neither of them minded. They had everything they needed, supplies, each other, and a growing love that felt as solid and enduring as the mountains themselves. One evening in late November, as they sat by the fire watching snow fall outside the window, Holmes said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" Beatrice asked, leaning against his shoulder. "About us. About the future. When spring comes, you will have saved money. You will have options. You could go to a different town, start a new life. I want you to know that if that is what you want, I will help you. I will not hold you here." She turned to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. He was afraid, she realized, afraid she would leave. "Do you want me to go?" she asked quietly. "God, no," he said with feeling. "I want you to stay. I want you to stay forever, but I need you to know it is your choice." "Then I choose to stay," she said firmly. "I choose you, Xavier. I choose this life we are building together. I do not want to go anywhere else." Relief flooded his face. He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "I love you," he said, the words rough but sincere. "I did not think I was capable of loving anyone anymore, but I love you, completely." "I love you too," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much." "Then stay with me," he said. "Not as my employee, but as my wife. Marry me, Beatrice. Build a life with me here on this mountain. I know it is not much. I am not a wealthy man, and this cabin is small. But I will give you everything I have. I will protect you and cherish you for the rest of my life." She was sobbing now, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. I do not need wealth or a big house. I just need you." They kissed, sealing the promise, and Beatrice felt like her heart might burst with happiness. She had come to this mountain running from violence and desperation, sleeping in a stable loft because she had nowhere else to go. And she had found a man who gave her the softest bed he owned, and then gave her his heart. They were married in January, making the trek down to White Pine during a break in the weather. The preacher performed the ceremony in his small church with his wife as a witness. It was simple and quick, but Beatrice felt the weight of the vows as she spoke them, the sacred promise to love and honor this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. When they returned to the cabin as husband and wife, Holmes carried her over the threshold, laughing at the tradition but honoring it anyway. That night, they celebrated their marriage with a feast she had prepared and lovemaking that was both tender and passionate. Beatrice fell asleep in her husband's arms in their bed in their home and thought that she had never been happier. Winter passed slowly but not unpleasantly. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, but they did not mind. They had each other, and that was enough. Holmes taught her how to play chess on a worn set he had carved himself. She taught him songs her mother had taught her, and sometimes they sang together in the firelight. They read books aloud, taking turns with the chapters. They planned for the future, what they would plant in the spring garden, improvements they wanted to make to the cabin, where they might add a room when they had children. They talked about that too, shyly at first, then with growing excitement. They both wanted a family, wanted to fill the cabin with life and laughter. Beatrice found herself hoping each month that she might be pregnant, and while it did not happen immediately, she was not worried. They had time. They had all the time in the world. Spring came gradually, the snow melting, the creeks running high with runoff, the world turning green again. Holmes went back to checking his trap lines and hunting. Beatrice planted the garden, expanding it from the previous year. They made their monthly trips to White Pine for supplies, and people began to treat them as a couple, as a family unit. The stable owner's nephew had left town, run out for other crimes. No one bothered Beatrice anymore. In May, she realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, and then another before she told Holmes. He was in the stable checking Ranger's hooves when she approached him. "Xavier, I need to tell you something," she said, her heart racing with excitement and fear. He looked up immediately, reading the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am better than all right," she said, tears welling up. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then a smile broke across his face, bright and genuine and full of pure joy. He dropped the horse's hoof and crossed to her in 2 long strides, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around. "A baby," he said, laughing. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" She asked, though she could clearly see that he was. "I am beyond happy," he said, setting her down carefully and placing his large hand over her still flat stomach. "I am going to be a father. You are going to be a mother. We are going to be a family. I have never wanted anything more in my entire life." They stood there in the stable, holding each other, tears of joy streaming down both their faces. Beatrice thought back to that terrified girl sleeping in a stable loft, desperate and alone. She thought about how far she had come, how much her life had changed. She had been given the softest bed, and then she had been given so much more love, safety, purpose, family. The pregnancy progressed well. Holmes became even more protective, barely letting her lift anything heavy. He took over most of the physically demanding chores, insisting she rest more. She felt cherished and cared for in ways that made her fall even more deeply in love with her husband. They spent long evenings talking about names, about whether it would be a boy or girl, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. The baby was born in January of 1877, during a snowstorm that trapped them in the cabin. Holmes delivered the child himself, his hands steady despite his fear, talking Beatrice through every moment. It was a boy, strong and healthy, with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. They named him Owen, a good, strong name for a mountain boy. Holmes held his son for the first time with tears streaming into his beard, his large hands cradling the tiny body with infinite care. "He is perfect," he whispered. "He is absolutely perfect." Beatrice watched her husband with their child, and her heart was so full she thought it might overflow. This was her family. This was her home. This was the life she had built from ashes and desperation. Owen grew strong and healthy, thriving in the clean mountain air. He was a happy baby, content to be passed between his parents' arms. Holmes was a devoted father, patient and gentle, teaching his son about the world even before the boy could understand. Beatrice watched her strong, fierce husband become soft and tender with their child, and she loved him even more for it. When Owen was a year old, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder and she was sick for months. Holmes took over everything, caring for her and Owen, managing the household, never complaining. She felt guilty for being such a burden, but he would not hear of it. "You are growing our child," he said firmly. "You are doing the hardest work there is. Let me take care of you." The second baby came in the spring of 1878, another boy they named Thomas. He was smaller than Owen had been, but just as healthy, with his mother's fair hair and his father's strong features. Holmes now had 2 sons, and he was fiercely proud of both. Life settled into a new rhythm. The cabin felt small with 2 growing boys, so Holmes spent that summer building an addition, a second room where the boys could sleep. He worked from dawn to dusk, determined to give his family more space. The neighbors from the nearest homestead, 3 miles down the mountain, came to help with the roof raising. Holmes and Beatrice were no longer isolated hermits. They had become part of the small mountain community, respected and liked. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Owen and Thomas grew into strong, capable boys, learning to hunt and trap alongside their father, learning to read and cook and care for a household from their mother. They were wild and free in the way only mountain children could be, at home in the wilderness. Beatrice gave birth to a daughter in 1880, a little girl they named Sarah. She had her mother's delicate features and her father's dark eyes, and she wrapped both parents and both brothers around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Holmes, who had been gentle with his sons, was utterly soft with his daughter, carrying her everywhere, singing to her, letting her climb all over him. "You are spoiling her," Beatrice said once, watching Holmes rock Sarah to sleep for the 3rd time that evening. "She is my daughter," he replied, as if that explained everything. "I am allowed to spoil her." Beatrice just smiled. She loved seeing this side of her husband, the tender protector, the devoted father. He had become everything she could have hoped for and more. In 1882, when Owen was 5, Thomas was 4, and Sarah was 2, Holmes made a decision. "I want to expand the cabin again," he told Beatrice. "I want to build a proper house, something that will last generations. I have been saving money from trapping. We have enough." So they built. It took 2 years, working through summers, but they built a solid 2-story house with 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, a living room with a stone fireplace large enough to heat the whole space. They kept the original cabin as a storage building and guest house, a reminder of where they had started. The children grew. Owen proved to be steady and responsible, his father's son in temperament. Thomas was more adventurous, always exploring, always pushing boundaries. Sarah was intelligent and stubborn, determined to keep up with her brothers in everything. They were a loud, chaotic, loving family, and their home was always full of laughter. In 1885, Beatrice became pregnant one last time. She was 35 now, and the pregnancy was difficult. Holmes worried constantly, hovering over her, barely letting her move. But she made it through, and in the spring of 1886, she gave birth to their 4th child, another son they named William. "Our family is complete," Holmes said, holding William and watching his other 3 children play outside the window. "4 healthy children, a strong home, and the love of my life. I have everything I ever wanted." Beatrice leaned against his shoulder, exhausted but content. "I never imagined this," she admitted. "When I was sleeping in that stable loft, terrified and alone, I could not have imagined that my life would become this. You gave me everything, Xavier. You saved me." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "You gave me a reason to live again, a reason to hope. You gave me a family and a purpose. We built this life together." It was true. They had built something beautiful out of desperation and chance, A meeting on a dark mountainside had become a love story, had become a legacy. The years continued to pass. The children grew into young adults. Owen took over much of the trap line work from his aging father. Thomas went to town and trained as a blacksmith, but he always came home to the mountain. Sarah, brilliant and fierce, became a teacher, riding down to White Pine 3 times a week to teach at the small schoolhouse. William, the youngest, stayed closest to home, helping his mother manage the household and the growing menagerie of animals they had accumulated. Holmes's hair turned gray, then white. His body, still strong but marked by age and hard work, moved a little slower. Beatrice gained silver threads in her blonde hair and laugh lines around her eyes. They grew old together, still in love, still grateful for each day. On a summer evening in 1895, nearly 20 years after their marriage, they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their grandchildren, Owen's 2 sons, played in the yard. The sounds of family filled the air. "You ever regret it?" Holmes asked quietly. "Staying here on this mountain, you could have had an easier life in a town." Beatrice took his weathered hand in hers, threading their fingers together. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This mountain, this life, this family, you are everything I ever wanted. You gave me the softest bed you owned, and then you gave me a lifetime of love. How could I ever regret that?" He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Beatrice Holmes. From that first night I found you running through the darkness until my last breath, I will love you." "And I love you," she replied. "My mountain man, my protector, my husband, my heart." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, one by one, same stars that had shone on them that first night so many years ago. They had built a life of purpose and love from the broken pieces of their pasts. They had created a family, a home, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Beatrice thought about the terrified young woman who had slept in a stable loft, desperate for safety. She thought about the lonely mountain man who had lived in isolation, running from his demons. 2 broken people who had found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful in the light. She leaned her head on Xavier's broad shoulder, feeling the steady strength that had never failed her in nearly 2 decades together. Around them, their children and grandchildren laughed and played. Above them, the mountains stood eternal and protective. And in her heart, Beatrice felt nothing but gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought her here, to this place, to this man, to this life. It was not the life she had imagined as a young girl in St. Louis. It was so much better. It was real and hard and beautiful and true. It was hers and Xavier's together, built from trust and love, and the simple act of kindness that had started it all, a lonely mountain man offering his softest bed to a desperate woman who needed safety. From that single act of generosity had grown everything: love, family, home, purpose, joy. It was a legacy that would outlast them both, carried on in their children and their children's children. A story of how 2 people saved each other and built something lasting from the ashes of their pasts. As night fell completely, and the family began to move inside, calling out good nights and making plans for tomorrow, Xavier helped Beatrice to her feet. They walked into their home together, hands clasped, hearts full, grateful for every moment of the beautiful, unexpected life they had created together on their mountain.